All right, today I'm going to be talking about the resolution of Pride and Prejudice from chapters 50 to the end of the novel, chapter 61. And so we have the final kind of tying up of the events that happened in the last chapter, where Lydia is now married, but it still was a huge scandal, and it was only through what they believe was their uncle's actions that this was kind of put to rights. And so Elizabeth has kind of realized that her opinion of Darcy has changed so completely from where she was at the beginning and all of the kind of the issues that she goes through with him. And she kind of is at the point where she believes that if he were to propose again, that she would accept him absolutely, like 100% wholeheartedly. But she knows, she's a realist, so she knows that Lydia's scandal, and now that Wickham has married into their family, it seems very unlikely that he is going to follow up, Darcy will follow up with another proposal of marriage. Mr. Gardner writes to tell the Bennet family that Wickham has accepted a commission. That's a new posting in the north of England, which is kind of very far away from where they are, far away from Longbourn and the Bennets. Lydia asked to be allowed to visit, and Mr. Bennet originally says no, because he doesn't want her bad influence on the younger daughters. But they know that might be a long time before they see each other again, if at all. And so Mr. Bennet acquiesces to her demands. And so they show up for a 10-day stay. And they're acting like nothing has happened. Like, they're acting like nobody's in the wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. That Lydia is just bragging about her marriage and her wonderful husband. Wickham is behaving like he's not a cat. And that this scandal was not his fault. And so Lydia is really oblivious to the fact that she almost created a situation that was to the detriment of her siblings. One morning, they're having this discussion, and Lydia is talking about her wedding day, and she casually mentions that Darcy was present at the wedding. And so Elizabeth's really curious about this, and so she writes a letter to Mrs. Gardner to ask for the details. So Miss Gardner sends a letter back, and she tells Elizabeth that it was Darcy who found Lydia and Wickham, and Darcy who paid Wickham's commission. He paid for the wedding. He paid off all of his debts to ensure that they could get married and it be financially agreeable to Wickham, because Wickham had no intentions of marrying Lydia. He was still holding out for an heiress. And so she drops hints, Miss Gardner drops hints that the only reason that Darcy did this is because he loved Elizabeth. And so Elizabeth obviously is shocked by this revelation. So Wickham and Lydia leave for their new home. And the Bennet family finds out that Mr. Bingley is coming back to Netherfield for a few weeks. It's hunting season, and so he's returning to the countryside so that he can participate in the hunt. Mr. Bennet is just like being a hard ass. He's like, I'm not going to go and visit him after everything that has happened, and much to the family's dismay. But a few days after he arrives, Mr. Bingley shows up with Darcy in tow at Longbourn at the Bennet's home. So Mrs. Bennet is overly attentive to Mr. Bingley. She's singing his praises, and the whole time she's acting horribly rude to Darcy. But remember, she only has, based off her first impression of him and the way he's behaved, she has no clue that it was his intervention that saved their entire family, because that's not public knowledge. But Elizabeth obviously is mortified by her treatment of Mr. Darcy, but is not going to tell her the situation just for Darcy's privacy. Darcy and Bingley come to dinner, and Bingley sits next to Jane. They chat the whole time. He's paying her undivided attention. Mr. Darcy sits on the opposite side of the table, away from Elizabeth, which makes conversation between them impossible, and it makes her sad because she wants to have an opportunity to speak to him. Bingley comes over a few more times, And he's very awkward. He's socially awkward really since the beginning, but he comes over a couple more times and tries to find ways to get Jane alone. He manages to do so, but he fails to propose. He goes out shooting with Mr. Bennett, comes back in, stays for dinner, and after dinner, when he's alone with Jane, he tells her that he's going to ask Mr. Bennett for permission to marry her, and Mr. Bennett happily agrees. And Jane tells Elizabeth that she's the happiest creature in the world. And it's kind of funny. We have like a role reversal here. So Elizabeth's feelings toward Darcy are now what his were towards her at the beginning. She wants to see him. She wants to hear from him. She puts herself in such that she can overhear his conversations. She wants to hear news of him. But she assumes the worst, that he's changed his mind. And that her change of heart about him has come too late, like it's all in vain. She fears that even if he were still interested in her, that Lydia's scandal has destroyed really any chance that he will ever propose again, because why would he want to align himself with that family? And she believes that with the certainty that this whole situation is a result of this poor breeding that he's kind of accused her family of, and that it would bring embarrassment to him if he were to connect himself with the family in any way. So all of that aside, she still has this little slight hope that he's done everything for her. She says, her heart did whisper, or Austen says, her heart did whisper that he had done it for her. But regardless, she's embarrassed, she's mortified, she's trying not to be too hopeful that something will come of it. Then, with Bingley's return, and his proposal to Jane, it kind of gets the wheels churning that Darcy may no longer care about their low social status. If he would encourage his friend to visit with Jane and then doesn't do anything to stop the marriage this time where he had before, then maybe that's a hope that he would also feel that same way about Elizabeth, so that gives her some hope. In chapters 56 through 61, a couple of things happen. A couple of days after Jane and Bingley get engaged, Lady Catherine comes to visit. She wants to speak to Elizabeth Bennet herself alone, and she does that outside of the family home. And she informs Elizabeth that she's heard this rumor that her nephew, Mr. Darcy, plans to be engaged to Elizabeth. And she says that it's a ridiculous rumor because there's no way, number one, that he would allow himself to be connected to the trash that is her family. And number two, that there's like this unspoken agreement that we've mentioned before that Darcy would marry her daughter, Miss de Bourgh. So Elizabeth responds very coolly. She keeps her chill. She doesn't act shocked or surprised or anything like that. She kind of keeps her cool, and she admits that she's not engaged to Darcy, but despite Lady Catherine's demands to not to enter into an engagement with Darcy, she refuses to do that, which shocks the hell out of Lady Catherine. Lady Catherine then claims that Elizabeth is bound to obey her. The claims, duty, honor, and gratitude, i.e., I'm of higher status than you, so you're going to do what I say. And states that the Bennets have such low connections that Darcy's marrying Elizabeth would ruin him in the opinion of all his friends and make him the contempt of the world. Elizabeth goes to bat for her family. She says that she's the daughter of a gentleman. And then she asserts her independence here in probably her most shining moment of the entire story. She says, I am resolved to act in that manner which will, in my own opinion, constitute my happiness, without reference to you or to any other person so wholly unconnected with me. Like a mic drop moment for her. Lady Catherine storms away in a rage. A few days after that, Darcy comes again to stay with Bingley at Netherfield. They're taking a walk one day. Elizabeth and Darcy are lagging behind. When they're alone, Elizabeth thanks Darcy for what he did in saving Lydia's good name. And he tells her that, yeah, I only did that because she's your sister. I only did it for you. He tells her that his feelings and affections towards her have not changed since his proposal. And Elizabeth tells him that her own feelings have changed and that if he were to ask her to marry him again, that she would accept him. So that night, Elizabeth's having a conversation with Jane, and she's talking about it, and Jane's really kind of shocked because she did not suspect that her sister liked Darcy like that. And she assures her that she does care for him a great deal. The next day, Darcy and Elizabeth walk together again, and that night Darcy goes to Mr. Bennet to ask for Elizabeth's hand, and he's really confused too because he has always heard Elizabeth talk about how proud he is and how arrogant he is, and so he needs assurance before he tells yes to Darcy. He's like, what's the deal here? Do you really like this guy? And Elizabeth's like, yeah, I love him. And by the way, let me tell you what he's done for our family, which obviously shocks the hell out of Mr. Bennet. And he is more than happy to let his second daughter and his favorite daughter, if we're just getting down to the bare bones of it, marry Darcy. The next day, Elizabeth and Darcy are discussing the development of their love, and I love this. She asks him when he first started to feel affection for her. So I wanted to talk about the quote. That's probably one of my favorite ones in the whole novel I was discussing. I paused it for just a little bit, so I'm kind of picking back up. I was going to talk about Darcy and Elizabeth's conversation. They were talking about the development of their love, and he asked her like when he started she asked him, I'm sorry, when he first started to feel affection for her, and Darcy replies, I cannot fix on the hour or the spot or the look or the words which laid the foundation. It is too long ago. I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. And so I think that that's really a testament to this story. Like Darcy he did not set out to fall in love with Elizabeth. Clearly, we saw him from the very beginning of the story. That was not going to be the case. And so she grew on him, and grew in his estimation of her. Normally he would have just put it beneath him because she was beneath him in status and social connections. And she did have that ridiculous family, but she was articulate, she was quick-witted, she was intelligent, she had a lack of pretense. She shunned snobbery and kind of, refused to let that, dampen her spirits or change her mind. Her mind wasn't easily swayed. And so all those things kind of helped her grow in his estimation of her. So Darcy writes to inform Lady Catherine of his upcoming nuptials. And then after hearing the news from the Bennets, the Lucases, the Collinses, and the Phillipses all come to Longbourn to congratulate the new couple. So after the weddings, Bingley purchases an estate near Pemberley. This is kind of the final chapter, chapter 61. Everything is kind of tying up all the loose ends. Bingley purchases an estate near Pemberley, and Jane and Elizabeth can become neighbors, and so they're able to visit each other frequently. Kitty is forced to keep away from the bad influence of Lydia, and so she spends a great deal of time instead at her elder sister's homes, and it's through their influence, their good influence, that she kind of grows and matures into a young woman. Lydia and Wickham remain unchanged. Wickham writes continually to Darcy asking for more money. He visits the Bingleys so frequently that even Mr. Bingley, who is very good-natured and good-humored, grows tired of seeing his face all the time. Elizabeth becomes really close to Georgiana. Lady Catherine builds a bridge to get over her nephew's marriage. She eventually accepts them and visits them at their home. And Darcy and Elizabeth continue to have a good, close relationship with the Gardners, who are kind of like her surrogate parents. And they're grateful. And it's grateful that they brought Elizabeth and Darcy back together at Pemberley. Final thoughts on the novel. The confrontation with Lady Catherine is probably Elizabeth's finest hour. All of the great qualities of Elizabeth that I mentioned before kind of put on display. Her pride in herself, her love of Darcy allows her to kind of stand up to Lady Catherine, who can't see past the end of her nose, her snobbery, to appreciate all the good qualities about Elizabeth. And then with the expression of her beliefs, Elizabeth demonstrates the enduring strength of her will and self-respect. And romance and love do indeed win out over all the obstacles that they face. Love triumphs over pride in Mr. Darcy's case, and it triumphs over prejudice in Elizabeth. And that's Pride and Prejudice.